Hey, this is Kez, and this is Nightmares at Midnight. Hello and welcome back to Nightmares at Midnight. Like I said, my name is Kez, and we are continuing with our Sea Creature series this week. We will also be continuing with it next week. So real quick, before we get into the Sirens and Mermaids topic that we're going to do today, I just want to give you my usual spiel about our places you can find us and listen to us. You can listen to us on nightmaresatmidnightpodcast.buzzsprout.com. That's our website, so you can go there, download it, and that way I can see how many people are listening. And then you can also listen on Spotify. And I know on Spotify you can follow us, so that way you get notified every time a new episode drops. And Google Podcast, Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Podcast Index, TuneIn Plus Alexa, and Podcast Addict. And I always forget iHeartRadio. You can listen to us there and subscribe there as well. And if you have ideas for the upcoming episodes, a lot of you have been messaging me on Facebook about it or on Instagram. You can also email us, nightmaresatmidnightpodcast@gmail.com. And the most important one is jump over to patreon.com/nightmaresatmidnightpodcast and join one of our membership groups. So that way you get the extras. You get the extra episodes, the one-on-one times with me. You get to see me video record the episode, which I'm sure is hilarious because I look ridiculous talking to myself. So we're going to jump right into the Sirens and Mermaids today. I'm not sure how long this episode will be, but we're going to run with it. So we're going to talk about sirens first. For sirens, it kind of depends what mythology you look into. I looked into Greek a lot. In Greek mythology, a siren was originally a creature that was half bird and half woman. And this surprised me because I didn't think that they were birds. I always thought they had fishtails. So this was new knowledge for me. It's a creature, half bird and half woman, who lured sailors to destruction by the sweetness of her song. So like in the beginning of our episode, the little musical part there, that is, they would sing, and when sailors would hear that sound, it would kind of brainwash them and lure them to their death. According to Homer, the author of the Odyssey, there were two sirens on an island in the Western Sea between, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but I think it's Aia and the rocks of Skyla. So there's an island out there. And later, the number was usually increased to 3 instead of just 2 sirens. And they were located on the west coast of Italy near Naples. So if you're geography prone, check that out, that location. They were variously said to be the daughters of the sea god or the river god by one of the muses. So that's Greek mythology. And in some versions, sirens were human companions to Persephone. So it is thought that the mythological Greek sirens were not necessarily originally evil. Greek folklore suggests that the god Zeus first created the sirens to be playmates for Persephone, his daughter. However, we know that Hades kidnapped Persephone, and these friends, or the sirens, were cursed by Demeter, the mother of Persephone. And after Persephone was carried off by Hades, they sought her everywhere, so the sirens were searching frantically for her, and they prayed for wings to fly across the sea. So that's where the wings and the woman combine there. And some versions, it's said that Demeter turned them into birds to punish them for not guarding Persephone. So one version is to help them look for Persephone, and the other version is a punishment. Other theories state that the siren, and the spelling is different here. At first it was Siren and now it's Sirin, is a Slavic or Russian take on the Japanese demon known as Tengu, or the Hindu deity known as Garuda. Sorry if I'm pronouncing those wrong. Meanwhile, fishtail people were a subject of art for a long time. They showed up in Mesopotamian art, at least from the Old Babylonian period, so like 1830 BC through 1531 BC, but they were usually men. So it was very rare at that point for it to be fish-tailed women. First it was men, and they typically were from the chest up human, and then from the chest down were fish tails. And so the only way you could tell the difference between a male and a female was that the males had really long beards. And I thought that was funny. Then, so in the medieval times is when it switched over. Sirens stopped being bird ladies and became more fish ladies. But birds and fish weren't typically interchangeable. So it's interesting how that switched. In ancient Greece, sirens were evolving. And male sirens used to appear in art more, but disappeared as artists' attitudes shifted. So all female sirens changed from monstrous birds with human heads to instrument-playing women who happen to have wings and bird feet. So it was kind of a mixture of both. It's like a transition. If you check out the art, it goes from male with beard sirens and females with bird bodies to female with fish tails and wings, and there's some that have both the feet and the wings and a fish tail attached. So it's interesting how art kind of transitions there. In some late Greek art, they appeared as women with no avian attributes at all, so they looked like normal humans. And as the legend traveled abroad, things got even more complicated. I think this is an interesting start to show where sirens actually originated from. Once they transferred over from being half women, half fish, they became known kind of as more aggressive. And they definitely have the reputation of being more aggressive between sirens and mermaids. Sirens are typically the bad ones, the bad guys, I guess. So the siren is known, like I said, for singing and luring sailors to their death. And I read also that they've been able to read the victim's mind. And so then they sing and convince this sailor that the siren is like the perfect person for them. The sailors then are uncontrollably drawn to be with the siren, not knowing that they're going to die in order to do it, which is super morbid, but I dig it. Greek mythology said that the sirens would die themselves, though, if anyone ever escaped their singing and lived to tell the tale. I didn't know that part either, that they would die if they didn't lure the fishermen in. I don't know how much I believe about that last part, but that was part of what was in the stories. Back to Homer with the Odyssey, he wrote that in order to prevent his sailors from dying, they would fill their ears with beeswax. And there's part of his story, I watched kind of a video on his story, is that he had his sailors put beeswax in their ears and then strap him to the mast of the ship and float past this island. So that way the siren would call and only he could hear it. His sailors couldn't. So there's pictures of these sirens like coming up to the boat and trying to lure him to his death. And he's like begging for the sailors to untie him and let him go. And they don't hear it, of course. And so when they float past the island, you know, that he survives and he got to see all of these sirens and proof that they were real. Some later writers suggested that the sirens would eat their victims' corpses, while others claimed that they just wanted to take the spirit and would leave the body to rot uneaten. So that's gross. It is unknown how the mythological sirens mated, that there was nothing in there about how they created each other. However, Greek literature mentions several families of sea nymphs, including sirens who were daughters of the river god. I think his name is, it's Achilles, maybe? Or Achilles. And it may be that male sirens existed to form family groups, but they haven't been detailed in folklore because they didn't sing a lot. They didn't lure the sailors like the women do. There very well may be just as many male sirens, we just don't hear about them. Sometimes the sirens were known to have two tails. This part was really interesting to me as I didn't know that either. So this was all new knowledge for me as well. The most famous siren with two tails is the Melusine, I think is how it's pronounced. She's really a famous siren, and all of you see it all the time, and it's the logo of the Starbucks coffee brand. So when Starbucks was preparing to open its doors in 1971, the founders were in search of an image that could represent their Seattle coffee company. And the siren they found, the creator of the coffee company, found this wood cutout of a 16th century Norse twin-tailed mermaid. Okay, and I've seen the pictures of this original cutout, and it's explicit. She is naked from pretty much the hips up, but she has two tails. So it kind of like goes, I'm trying to describe it. If you could see my hands, this is why you should get Patreon, is so you can see me talk, like you guys can actually see me instead of just listen. So she's got two tails that go like off the left and the right. So in the logo for Starbucks, the part of the little tails that you see kind of come around the circle up by her head, those are actually part of her two tails, and they cropped the original wood cutout down so that way it was a little less explicit. So that's where you see that. The wood cutout was drawn from an image of her who was popular in France and Northern Europe during the 15th and 16th centuries. Like I said, this first siren was naked from the waist up and had a plump stomach with a belly button, and her tails were kind of promiscuously splayed, and through redesigns they hid those features. Their thought process was that the mermaid, quote, was supposed to be as seductive as the coffee itself, but when I think about it, sirens were meant to lure you to your death, and I'm not really a coffee drinker, so I kind of feel like that's what it's doing, is luring you to the addiction of drinking coffee. But that's just my opinion. According to the Starbucks website, Starbucks believed that the siren's image could capture the seafaring history of coffee and Seattle's strong seaport roots. Which, I mean, I understand that because it's right on the ocean, but I feel like the siren may not have been the best choice. But I mean, I guess it's working for them for their logo. A little more about Melusine, the siren that they copied. She was a feminine spirit found in many medieval European folktales, and this Melusine has a serpent or fish's tail and sometimes has wings. So it has the two tails and the wings. And in Hungary, France, and Germany all have different accounts of Melusine. The most famous legend describes her as a willful girl who tries to get revenge on her human father on behalf of her fairy mother. And then she's punished by her mother with a tail. So she got punished and turned into a siren, I guess. Which is a different version than the Greek version. So are sirens and mermaids the same? No, they are different in several ways. The main difference is temperament, which we talked about, that sirens are known to be more aggressive, whereas a mermaid is more kind and caring, which is why you hear like them trying to save sailors rather than lure them to their death. And they may also appear to look quite different from each other. A mermaid is always half woman and half fish, but as we have seen, sirens kind of are a mixture of multiple animals rather than just the fish. Mermaids have always been half fish, half woman. While they shy away from human interaction, mermaids are often portrayed as actively rescuing sailors in distress from their sea homes. Probably the most famous mermaid of all, the Little Mermaid, from the Hans Christian Andersen story, falls in love with a prince and will do anything to be with him. And so there's no evil intentions there. She's just a kind young mermaid who wants to be a part of the human world, I guess. So we're going to talk about the history a little bit. A mermaid is a mythical sea-dwelling creature, often described as having the head and body of a woman and fish's tail below the waist. Stories of mermaids have existed for thousands of years and span cultures across the world, from coastal settlements in Ireland to the landlocked Karoo Desert in South Africa. The English word mermaid is a compound of mere, which is Old English for sea, and maid, meant as a girl or a young woman. A famous Greek folktale claimed that Alexander the Great's sister, and I'm going to pronounce her name wrong because, yeah, it's Greek, Thessaloniki, was transformed into a mermaid upon her death in 295 BC and lived in the Aegean Sea. So this is a story about his sister. Whenever a ship passed, she would ask the sailors one question: "Is King Alexander alive?" And if the sailors answered correctly, declaring he lives and reigns and conquers the world, Thessaloniki would allow the ship to continue on its journey. Any other answer was said to anger her, and she would conjure a storm and doom the vessel and its sailors to a death at sea. That's not a very good look for mermaids. It kind of reminds me of Ursula, actually. Then there's the Eastern Europe, the Rusalki, often translated as mermaid. The Rusalki are water nymphs of Slavic mythology. So we're at Slavic point now. While initially regarded as benevolent spirits of fertility and agriculture, Rusalki gained a more sinister description in the 1800s. They were believed to be the ghosts of women who died violent deaths by drowning. In their anger and sorrow, the Rusalki now lured men and children to their watery graves. So that kind of sounds more like a siren rather than a mermaid. But that's the Slavic mythology. Then we're going to jump to Ireland. So they called them Merrows there. And female Merrows, with their beauty and long green hair, resemble our traditional views of mermaids. Their counterpart, the male Merrow, is considered grotesque, cruel, and more fish than man. The ruthless nature of the male Merrow is why the creatures were said to have relationships with humans rather than with each other. One of the earliest mermaid legends appear in Syria around 1000 BC when the goddess Atargatis dove into a lake to take the form of a fish. As the gods there would not allow her to give up her great beauty, only her bottom half became a fish, and she kept her top half in human form. Archaeologists have found Atargatis' figure on ancient temples, statues, and coins. Clearly, as you can tell, that all over history, there's different versions of mermaids, different versions of sirens. Some are kind of blended together. And mermaids often appeared as figureheads on the front of nautical vessels. The figurehead, which was popular between the 16th and 20th centuries, is a carved wooden decoration located on the bow of ships. While many different decorations have been used, mermaids proved popular with the sailors as they were believed to appease the sea, ensuring good weather and finding a safe way back to land. That little part was new. I didn't know why they put mermaids on there. I just assumed because they were ships, but to know that there's a little extra reason why makes more sense. We talked a little bit about The Little Mermaid, one of the most famous stories by Hans Christian Andersen, and it was published in 1837 in Copenhagen, Denmark, as part of a collection of children's fairy tales. The story has been adapted to many different forms of media, including theater, opera, and obviously most popularly, a Disney animated film in 1989. Boy, that makes me feel old. I was born in 1990, and that makes me feel old to know that it came out that long ago. Andersen and Disney's versions of the tale have noticeable differences, though. In Andersen's story, the mermaid princess loses her tongue to obtain legs, and every time she walks, her pain is compared to walking on knives. While the Disney tale concludes with the heroine and the prince marrying, Andersen's story is somewhat more tragic. The princess fails to undo her curse, and the prince marries someone else. The Little Mermaid sacrifices herself and ends up living with the spirits of the air. That's quite a bit different than Disney. And in 1909, the Danish sculptor Edvard Eriksson was commissioned to create a statue inspired by Andersen's fairy tale. The bronze sculpture has remained a popular tourist attraction and icon of Copenhagen since its unveiling in 1913. That'd be really cool to visit and see, I think, to see the bronze statue. What about Merman? Because we have talked briefly about them, how some versions have them as super ugly and aggressive, and some of them have them just as beards and not really involved in the story. Though not as well known as their female counterparts, mermen have an equally fierce reputation for summoning storms, sinking ships, and drowning sailors. One especially feared group, which I think the name is funny, is called the Blue Men of the Minch, are said to dwell in the Outer Hebrides off the coast of Scotland, according to the Scotsman. They look like ordinary men, from the waist up anyway, with the exception of their blue-tinted skin and gray beards. So this is the first version that I've heard that have not just normal skin, that this one is blue-tinted. Local lore claims that before laying siege to a ship, the Blue Men often challenge its captain to a rhyming contest. If the captain is quick enough basically to rhyme back, he can best the Blue Men and save his sailors from a watery grave. We're going to jump from Scotland to Japanese now. I'm giving you all this history, so bear with me here. Japanese legends have a version of merfolk called kappa or kappa. They're said to reside in Japanese lakes, coasts, and rivers, and these child-sized water spirits appear more animal than human, with simian faces and tortoise shells on their backs. And that's according to the Encyclopedia Britannica. So that one I feel is a little more logical or believable. Like the Blue Men, the Kappa sometimes interact with humans and challenge them to games of skill in which the penalty for losing is death. Kappa are said to have an appetite for children and those foolish enough to swim alone in remote places, but they especially prize fresh cucumbers. So that's completely different than people. Another mermaid encounter, once offered as a true story, is described in Edward Snow's Incredible Mysteries and Legend of the Sea. So a sea captain off the coast of Newfoundland described his 1614 encounter as Captain John Smith, the one of Jamestown's fame, that's what we're talking about, saw a mermaid swimming about with all possible grace. He pictured her as having large eyes, a finely shaped nose that was somewhat short, and well-formed ears that were rather too long. Smith goes on to say that her long green hair imparted to her an original character that was by no means unattractive. In fact, Smith was so taken with the lovely woman that he began to experience the first effects of love. Sounds like she's luring him in, huh? Surrealist painter René Magritte depicted a sort of reverse mermaid in his 1949 painting, The Collective Invention. By the 1800s, hoaxers churned out faked mermaids by the dozen to satisfy the public's interest in the creatures. The great showman P.T. Barnum displayed the Fiji mermaid in the 1840s, and it became one of his most popular attractions. They would pay 50 cents, hoping to see a long-limbed, fish-tailed beauty comb her hair, and were definitely disappointed. Instead, they saw a grotesque, fake corpse a few feet long. It had the torso, head, and limbs of a monkey and the bottom part of a fish. To modernize, it was an obvious fake, but it fooled and intrigued many at the time. So, could there be a scientific basis for the mermaid stories? Some researchers believe that sightings of human-sized ocean animals such as manatees and dugongs might have inspired merfolk legends. These animals have a flat, mermaid-like tail and two flippers that resemble stubby arms. They don't look exactly like a typical mermaid or merman, of course, but many sightings were from quite a distance away, and being mostly submerged in water and waves, only parts of their bodies were visible. Identifying animals in water is difficult since eyewitnesses, by definition, are only seeing a small part of the creature. When you add in the factor of low light at sunset and the distances involved, positively identifying even a known creature can be difficult. So a glimpse of a head, an arm, or a tail just before it dives under the water might have spawned some mermaid reports. So I posted on, I think it was on Instagram, maybe it was both Instagram and Facebook, about Blackbeard's logbook. There's a map of his travels, and he is one of the most famous and feared pirates in history, and he made mention of the possibility of mermaids in that logbook. He had instructed his crew on several voyages to stay away from certain charted waters that he called enchanted because of mermaids in these areas that Blackbeard and his crew members had reported seeing. When you look at this map, there's sea monsters, and then there's one specific spot that has mermaids on it. It's pretty interesting, actually. More modern mermaid reports are very rare, but they do occur. For example, news reports in 2009 claimed that a mermaid was sighted off the coast of Israel in the town of Kiryat, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, Kiryat Yam. It, or she, performed a few tricks for onlookers just before sunset, then disappearing for the night. One of the first people to see the mermaid, Shlomo Cohen, said, "I was with friends when suddenly we saw a woman laying on the sand in a weird way. At first, I thought she was just another sunbather, but then we approached and she jumped into the water and disappeared. We were all in shock because we saw she had a tail." The town's tourism board was delighted with their newfound fame and offered a $1 million reward for the first person to photograph the creature. Unfortunately, the reports vanished almost as quickly as they surfaced, and no one ever claimed the reward. So here's what we're going to do, folks. I'm going to throw on a mermaid tail, and we're going to go there, and you guys can take a picture of me, and then we'll split the $1 million, because that sounds great. In 2012, an Animal Planet special called Mermaids: The Body Found renewed interest in mermaids. It presented the story of scientists finding proof of real mermaids in the oceans. It was fiction, but presented in a fake documentary format that seemed realistic. The show was so convincing that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration received enough inquiries following the TV special that they issued a statement officially denying the existence of mermaids. So that means it seemed pretty real, but clearly they stated it wasn't. So, what's my opinion? I think that sirens and mermaids are real. I mean, like I said in our previous Kraken episode, we've only discovered about 5% of our oceans. Like, we know more about space than we do the oceans. So how do we know that there isn't mermaids or sirens? I know there's a lot of ability to photo edit now, but some of the videos that I saw were pretty convincing. I know a lot of people probably think I'm nuts or probably think I'm out in left field, and maybe I am a little bit. But if Yetis can be real, or a Mothman, or other mythological creatures, then why not sirens or mermaids? As far as books, there's literally hundreds of thousands of books about mermaids and sirens. One of my favorites that I looked over was called The Deep by Rivers Solomon. And I saw a sci-fi horror version, and it's called Into the Drowning Deep, and it's prequel Rolling in the Deep by Myra Grant. Those are three I mentioned. Those are 3 books that are pretty interesting about sirens and mermaids. A list of movies. There's The 13th Year, which released in 1999. And then there's Mermaids in 1990 with Cher. That one looked funny. I would like to check that one out more. Then there's Killer Mermaid in 2014. Mermaids appeared in Peter Pan in 1953, where they had starfish over their boobs and seashells in their hair. They seemed pretty nice in there, except for a little part where they attacked Wendy. Then there's Lady in the Water in 2006 by M. Night Shyamalan. I can't pronounce his last name, which is a psychological thriller. Then there's Mermaid, Lake of the Dead, 2018. That's a Russian horror fantasy movie inspired by Slavic mythology. So I saw the trailer for that one. Looks super scary. So if you're into that, you probably won't swim in deep water after that. Then in the very popular Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire in 2005, I feel like the ones in Harry Potter would be more like sirens rather than mermaids, given the explanation of sirens being more ugly and mean. These ones didn't look like beautiful, topless women with fishtails. These looked more creature-esque with webbed hands and stuff. The Mermaid in 2016 was made in China. I saw the trailer for this one as well, where Shan, a mermaid, is sent by her people to assassinate Exxon, a playboy and bigwig property developer whose sonar technology is destroying underwater life. So the assassination plan backfires, though, when the pair end up falling in love. So it's the Chinese version of The Little Mermaid and modern, I guess. And then as far as merch, this one has so much merch, I literally can't just tell you specifics. Between cups with mermaid tails on them to actual tails you can buy to swim with, there's a ton of options. Or I follow on TikTok and Instagram. There is a lady who posts pictures and videos of her swimming as a mermaid. They actually have tails that you can buy that I guess are pretty expensive that you can take and actually swim with. I considered getting one a long time ago when I was fit and a teenager, but it didn't happen, and now I get to tell the tales about them anyway. That's about all I have for mermaids and sirens. If you have more information about them, please feel free to let me know. I'd love to add on to it with our next episode. I am not telling you what the next episode of the Sea Creature series is. You're just going to have to tune in and find out. Thanks for tuning into this episode, and I just want to thank all of our fans that continuously listen every week. And please share with your friends. Like I say every time, you never know who is a closet cryptid mythological fan. So sharing my podcast will help get the word out. So thanks for tuning in, and catch us next time.